Okay, so now we're ready to go. I'm going to come in here with my other brush and I'm going to mix up the color of the blue sky that I see up there. And I have a whole range of blues here. Very rarely do I ever paint directly from one particular color and one particular color only. I like to have a few changes going on up in my sky. So I'm going to pick up some cerulean blue here, which is a really great sky color. But I'm going to adjust it with a little bit of cobalt blue. And I'm going to pick up some ultramarine blue up in here, which is going to darken it down a little bit. So I'll control some of my pigment here with a paper towel. Again, control the charge in the brush. So I'm just going to go in here now and start to lay in some of these places where the clouds are not. So I'm painting essentially the blue sky around the cloud. And you can see what's happening here is I'm getting sort of these soft, fuzzy edges going on. And it's just giving me a sense of how these clouds feel. They're kind of these cirrus clouds collecting up there at the top of Yosemite Falls. Now generally skies tend to be darker towards the top. So here's where I might mix up a little bit more ultramarine blue, perhaps even a touch of alizarin crimson, which moves my blue into more of a purple range up here. So I'm just restating some of this, so I'm getting a little darker color up near the top of my sky. And again, just trying to feel my way through this. These don't have to be perfect. What I'm trying to paint is cloudness, as opposed to, ooh, I got to paint that cloud exactly. Because if you're always trying to paint something exactly, you'll get in here and you'll fiddle-faddle with it. And you'll lose some of the spontaneity. I'm just trying to get this feeling of these clouds moving across that immense sky up there in Yosemite. And I can adjust the shapes any way that I want. But for the most part, I'm just trying to catch this feeling that I witnessed when I was up there. So getting some of this nice dark blue near the top. And then as I come down a little bit, I'm going to soften. I'm going to use more of this cerulean blue here. There's another one, a little bit of what I call peacock blue. And these are Holbein colors, so I'm using some of the labels on their pigment. Cerulean, ultramarine, cobalt blue. These blues run standard across the different manufacturers of color. But periodically, a manufacturer will have a color that's unique to their lineup. For instance, peacock blue is one of the blues that Holbein makes, which I use occasionally. It gives me some nice punch to the color. And Daniel Smith has a whole set of colors that they make. They even have one here. Actually, I have a Daniel Smith color in my palette here. This is called Iridescent Cerulean. So this is kind of a magic color. It's actually just cerulean blue that has a little bit of metal flake in it. So what's kind of nice about that is it gives your painting a little bit of sparkle in places. So partly because the metal flake catches light and reflects. So anyway, there's some kind of cool stuff you can play with. But for the most part, most colors are consistent across the board with a little variance between manufacturers, but not too much. So I'm going to get this blue in here around this peak. Get these clouds. Okay, that's pretty much what I want to accomplish here. What I'm going to go do next is I'm going to clean my brush. And there's a couple places where I want to retain a little little more dramatic edge to the cloud. So I'm just going to be drying my brush out here, getting what I call a damp, thirsty brush. And I can still come in and pick up a little bit of some of the cloud. So I can push some of that blue away just to retain, reshaping some of the edges here. Another technique you can do too, if you're not quite picking it up, you can come back here and blot with your paper towel just to pick up some of that blue that may have seeped in where you don't want it. So I'm just doing some little refinements here. That's about it. In here, I want to get a little more of this showing up. So that's pretty much what I want. All right, good. Now, some of the clouds have a little shadow in them. I'm seeing up here in the photograph, there's sort of a purpley gray cast underneath this more massive cloud that's happening. So I'm simply going to make sure this is still damp. And I'm going to take this blue that I've already been using and I'm going to come back in, mix a purple. And a nice way to mix purple is taking a little bit of what I call alizarin crimson, which is a cool red. Okay, and I mix that up with a little bit of the blue that I have here. I'm going to pick up a little of this brown that I have in my palette here just to dull it down a little bit so it's not a garish purple. This little bit of burnt sienna has a little bit of warm brown and gold in it. We'll get into some color theory maybe later on, but this just gives me sort of this purpley shadow tone. And I'm just going to start to wash this in on this big cloud coming up here. Okay, and this just gives me a little bit of a shadow tone. Maybe I'll reprise it a little bit over here so that the cloud has some depth and dimension. And that's all I'm doing is getting some of this in, which is a little different than the blue of the background. All right, so this gives me a little of that. And I'm gonna, before it dries, I want to go in and just soften and shape some of those edges to my satisfaction so that it looks the way I want it to look and how I want it to feel. Okay, so clouds are soft, so I'm using water to suggest the softness up here. Okay, if I get too hard an edge, I mean, there are some clouds that do have harder edges, as I mentioned earlier, cumulus clouds. But if you paint all your clouds with too hard an edge, they start to lose their sense of volume and they start to look like a stage prop. So that's one of the reasons you do a wet into wet up here, just to help shape the volume of the clouds. Clouds have a mass to them, and so softening at the edges makes this come alive a little bit.